Hi, Liz.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
So, hi everyone. This is Roman with Holistic Dog Training, and that's Liz Lidstone. Now, what's special with Liz and why I asked her to come over here? A, she's a trainer, a fellow dog trainer, and a fellow behaviorist, and she's an animal lover, and she has something very special, and that's what we're talking about today. She helps people who have disabilities and working with their dogs because she has a special situation happening. She was able to transform her trauma into a superpower. So tell me about that a little bit.
So in 2012, I had a horse riding accident,
Mm.
which resulted in a head injury. Um, and I fell off at speed. So I fell from a height at speed and I landed on the base of my skull and I flipped over onto my face,
Ouch.
which is all very undignified, a bit dramatic. And I don't remember any of it, luckily. But it was a serious horse riding accident. My riding hat broke into two pieces on the impact.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty exciting stuff. But unfortunately, I wasn't conscious to see it all. But the hat did save my life. But
Wow.
as a result of that, I now have lifelong disabilities.
I'm sorry to hear that. And I'm standing with you here because I don't have disabilities, but I do have disabilities. You don't see them. Um, I'm diagnosed with ADD. I have
Mm-hmm.
difficulties. The reason why I choose this work is because I had difficulties working in other branches. Um, I also have severe PTSD that comes to the equation. Of course, nothing compared to you. There's not a comparison, but we're coming from a similar angle. We were able to become good at what we're doing because of our experience. And
Yeah.
how, so, tell me a little bit about that. What was um, your biggest life-changing moment from feeling in that situation you were in this new life stage into going to the next level? What was that that kind of like triggered you?
So, as a result of the head injury, I've lived with seizures ever since. And I also have a condition called chronic daily hemiplegic migraine, which, in short, I live with constant daily migraine, so pain, visual disturbance, balance issues, feeling sick all the time. Just most people, when they have migraines, they have to go to bed and lie in a dark space because you're very photosensitive and noise is very overstimulating. But if you have it every day, you just have to learn to live with it. Um, and so the hemiplegic side means that it causes paralysis. Um, and it causes temporary paralysis. It's kind of a rare type of migraine. Most people, when they think of migraine, they think about sort of pain in your head. There's actually lots of different kinds of migraine, but hemiplegia is paralysis. So what happens is when my migraine reaches its peak pain levels, I start to slur, my face drops, I lose the sensation in my hand, and I have one side of weakness, and it very much looks like I'm having a stroke. And this is my brain. When I can't process the level of pain that I'm in, it begins to shut down certain parts of my body. And it's an interesting response to pain, but it's unfortunate to live with. um, makes things quite difficult, but
Yeah.
it's something you had to live with and you adapt to survive.
Well, first of all, I so appreciate you for being here today. Um, and I know you would do the extra mile to be here today because it's something that you're very passionate about. Um,
Yeah, definitely. And the
and
reason I then went into sort of animal training from this is that obviously I had a lot of different conditions to learn to live with and lots of new disabilities. But the whole way through, I've always had animals, and they've always kept me they give me a reason to get up. And I've never once had an animal say, I can't work with you, you're too disabled. But I have had that from humans. But animals just don't judge you. And that's why I think it's so important that we make training accessible, because animals will work with everyone or anyone. There are species that just, they just don't judge. And that's why I am very passionate about this subject, because I found, they've been a huge part of my life, both before and after my accident.
I'll keep my mouth shut in general about this kind of stuff, why people make a decision to judge people. I was one of those people in the past who would see kind of like not seeing the disability and judge. Well, why do you have a sticker in your car and why you parked here? You just walked out very normally from your car. Therefore, you don't have any problem. So why don't you park somewhere else, kind of thing? And it was very when I become first aware, I was very disturbed because I wouldn't expect me to not being able to see that. I kind of blame myself. Why wouldn't you be able even to think about judging those people and questioning why they must have a reason for it, even if it's not visible? Back then, I didn't know about my PTSD, but later on, I recognized that you only need one trigger to get you back in that pain level, and it can happen at any time. And some dogs have this ability to actually find that time before it's going to happen and pick up on that, see how the body changes, how your emotion changes, how your energy field changes, and then are there for you. So what was the milestone with your dogs? Because how many dogs do you have?
I have 2 of my own. We've got a current foster dog and we've got a very angry cat.
I can see the picture. So what was your life-changing moment where you said, hey, I can work with my dog, even in these conditions?
So weirdly, it wasn't my current assistance dog who I have now. It was my pet dog. Now, just a few weeks before my accident, I brought home my first dog, not a family dog. And this was the dog that I was going to do all the training with. It was going to be my responsibility. I'd been begging for this dog for years, and I finally brought him home, and he was a scruffy Jack Russell Terrier. And he was actually there the day of my accident. He was only about 14 weeks old, but he was there.
How old were you? Sorry, I need to ask the question.
Oh, so I must have been about 2012. So I must have been about 14 or 15.
Oh, wow.
Because it affected all of my schooling as well. So I'd gone from being, I was predicted C to A star grade, top grades the whole way through, apart from maths. And after this accident, they wrote off all my exams. I didn't pass many exams at all, and it just completely changed my capabilities in exams, because I'd had this head injury and I just couldn't remember any of the past 9 years of study leading up to it.
So basically from one minute to the other, you got your whole life stopped, like a pause, then a delete, and then start all over again.
Yeah. There are very different sort of sections in my life. There's kind of before the accident and then everything afterwards.
The new Liz.
Yeah. But the kind of the real pinnacle for me was this tiny Jack Russell Terrier. And I'd had this accident, and this was now I ended up being pretty much housebound for a year. I was pulled out of education. The future that I'd envisaged for so long, I had always known that I wanted to be a dog trainer, and I wanted to go into, I wanted to work with livestock and animals. And suddenly I was housebound for a year, and I just didn't know what to do. And this tiny Jack Russell, who he was just a pet dog, he began because he'd grown up with me having seizures, he then began to naturally alert to them.
Wow. So from
Um,
a scrappy rescue dog, all of a sudden he becomes your basically support dog and your teacher and your healer at the same time, while you're trying to kind of grab on something to kind of keep your day
yeah,
going.
and
I
I
used to have
suddenly,
migraines in the past, and it was in school. I didn't know why, but at some point it was so bad I just couldn't keep my eyes open. I couldn't drive home. I was just try to lay down as flat as possible. So if I project that up to that level, I can imagine how suddenly all of a sudden it just it just numbs you down. Plus, you have this disability that you get paralyzed. So how can your dog help you there? What would you do?
so it was at this point that I then looked at this dog who, was only ever supposed to be a pet. And I was looking at him and thinking, well, if you can do this naturally, what else can you do? And then that was how I started researching and learning about assistance dogs and everything they can do. And I started training him basic behaviors. And then from him, I've gone to the point that I'm at now, where I have another dog who is actually my full working assistance dog. And, he was the one that started it all. And we were sort of learning together, and we were clumsy. There are things that I would definitely do differently now. We were both muddling through trying to make it work, but I owe a lot to that dog, because although my world changed, he then suddenly opened up this other world.
So he channeled you to the next level.
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing. We didn't expect this from dogs. We think dogs have four legs and bark a lot and poop a lot and eat a lot and
Yeah.
they're expensive and they're kind of a pain in the butt. So sometimes, but you didn't have much support. Were your parents into this as well, supporting you? What was your support system other than the dog?
So I've always been very fortunate in that I've got a really lovely family, and they've been really supportive. But obviously, I'd been pulled out of education, and so I was home on my own a lot because my mother worked. And again, that was worrying for her, because she'd have to keep constantly messaging me to make sure I was A, conscious, and B, surviving at home on alone.
Oh, wow.
So, having the dog, and that gave me some focus and a reason to get up and do bits and pieces. But I've been very fortunate that I've always had a very strong family unit. But ultimately, I lost the time. It was just me and this little young dog at home.
So you had this motivation that your dog basically pushed to that level, next motivation, more, and you're like, hey, we can do more things. It was kind
Yeah,
of basically the light in your tunnel, getting out of there.
definitely.
So
He challenged. No, I mean, he challenged me anyway, because he was a Jack Russell, and he's a terrier. Um,
yeah.
but he forced me to skill up and develop skills
Yeah.
that I just didn't have before, and he did make me a best trainer. Um,
What did
but
he
yeah,
taught
it's
you? What was
fantastic.
the first thing you said? Wow, I didn't think I can do that.
So probably the force-free side of things. Um,
Oh,
so
you touched a point here.
because growing up, the only person I saw on TV as a trainer used harsh methods, and the only people, I live in a very rural area, and so the majority of dog trainers when I was growing up were all gun dog trainers, and I didn't have a fear-free, force-free mentor. And it was only because I went in search of these, of dog training online, that I came across people. And it was then that I made the conscious decision that I didn't want to train with pain.
You know how that feels.
Yeah.
People don't see that aspect. They see just because the dog doesn't show pain doesn't mean it doesn't have pain. They don't see where the dog gets numb and the dog shuts down and the dog feels helpless. So you know what helpless means, you know what numb means, you know what dissociation means. I don't remember in my stress situation what I have to do and how you struggle to get yourself up and going, and all you need is a motivation to get to that next level. And all you get is pain and punishment and frustration. and fear. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
it's
been
like,
there too.
I think as well with Jack Russells and the terrier breeds, you see so often people say they're stubborn, they're hard headed, they won't do anything for humans. And actually, that's what I was taught when I was growing up about these breeds, was they were stubborn. And actually, a lot of my frustration came because I was thinking like that initially. And when I started realizing he wasn't stubborn, he was just,
It was persistent.
he had the ability to say no, and he was saying no because he didn't like the training methods I was using that
Right.
I'd seen growing up. And
How
as soon
many
as I
times have
changed that, he changed too.
how many times have you said no to something that you didn't feel well about doing? How many times have people have suggested you to do something and like, I don't feel like this is the right thing for me to do? And then how many times have you said, no, I'm gonna push it, I'm gonna follow through? I think we wouldn't have that conversation if you were not what people would call stubborn. It's that motivation to keeps you going because you believe what you're doing is right, and then you stick
Yeah.
to it. What's wrong with it? And because somebody doesn't like it, you have to punish you or take your dog away. It doesn't make any sense. Now, which part were important to you to do the dog training, considering all these options that you had available and not available during the dog training? Like I can imagine using the clicker sometimes can be a challenge, or bending down to pick up a treat, or bending down and give him a treat. How did you manage all this? I mean, it's a lot of things to do in dog training. I mean, I know people who can see and struggle with dog training, and I met people who cannot see and were trainers and they didn't see what the dog was doing and they didn't know what to do. They're struggling. What were your
So
struggles?
there were lots of struggles, and there just weren't resources to teach you alternative methods and adaptations. And a lot of it was me muddling through, finding ways that worked for me that maybe weren't mainstream, but it worked for me and it worked for my dog. But actually, a lot of this stuff I had to do on my own. And things like clickers, as you say, you know, now I try and do talks and, suggest alternatives and adaptations and training aids. And the reason I want to share them is because I've had to do it all alone on my own and work it out. And I want to try and share that so that there is an online resource. Um, but yeah, I think in some of your questions later on, you asked me how I would change stuff. So I've got some of the aids and adaptations to show you. But yes, there were huge challenges with
You
things
have
like
something?
bending
Can I see
down.
something?
You can see something. Okay, here's a preview just to get you really confused.
Hold on. Okay, it
And
looks
then,
like a
okay,
yellow sandpaper,
yeah,
a tennis racket. Okay, hold on,
sort
I
of.
got you here.
So yeah, I'll go into what this is and why it works later. But this
Okay,
is a wooden spoon,
wow,
and this is how I do target training, as opposed
good.
to the standard kind of. Where's my
Yeah,
spirit
yeah,
on
yeah,
that one?
yeah.
But
Gotcha.
yeah,
With the
I will.
antenna.
Yeah. So I will. I think it's question 3 or 4 you were going to ask me later on. So when we get to them, I will start showing you like my whole
Okay,
toolkit I've got down here.
let's do this.
Yeah.
Okay, now first question, and so everybody wants to pay attention here. Um, how challenging was it working with your dog after your accident? The answer was already very clear. It was very challenging. You had all these complications. You have to adjust training skills. You have to adjust training methods. You had to go beyond the regular stuff, kind of invent the wheel from scratch. Now, the next question would be how you work with people with disabilities before the accident. Have you worked with people with disabilities before as a trainer? No, because you were too young. You barely had a dog. So you came out from nowhere, got into this dramatic incident, and then you start a completely new life, Liz part two. And then you kind of said, you know what? I need to do something for myself because there's nothing there for me to work on. I barely kind of keep myself on the line. And what
So
will have you?
The only experiences I'd had with dog training and being in classes and groups before that was that I'd always wanted to do dog training. So I'd been I was an assistant for another local dog trainer. And
Oh,
she was great. She took me under her wing. She showed me her class. She let me come to her classes. Then she started letting me help out a bit. So when I was about 14, I was assisting in a dog training class, purely because this lady took a chance and took me under her wing and showed me, let me experience dog training. But when I was at those
was it?
classes, I didn't interact with any disabled clients or
Right,
people
right.
attending the sessions. But I did see the dog training world from an able-bodied point of view at that point.
Mm-hmm. So was it a positive reinforcement training, or what was the situation there?
So this lady was a traditional trainer,
Which means
and this is
balance trainer,
so.
correction words.
So she was a gun dog trainer, and we still, she kickstarted everything for me. So between her and my little dog, she was the one that got me onto the path of training, and I will forever be thankful for that. And we don't always agree with each other's methods, and we might have different ways of training, but I still massively thank her for the opportunity she gave me, because and not a lot of people would have taken a 14-year-old and said, yeah, you can come to my sessions, you can be my apprentice,
Right,
sort of
right,
thing.
right.
So I take a lot of positives from her, and her kindness and her opportunities. But we also, we do train differently. But we remain in contact, and she'll always be my original mentor because she took a chance with me.
Yeah,
So I'll always be grateful for that. We do train differently, but we can still, respect each other.
right. Now, from your perspective, what are the things trainers like you should have in their toolbox? Like, what's your toolbox look like?
So the difference now is that I can look at this from the perspective of a disabled person, but also as a trainer and a behaviourist. So the difference is that I can look at training things like clicker training. I would have previously trained them just, the simple, you shape a behaviour, you click, you mark your reward, and the process of that. But I also know that, if you're working as a visually impaired person, or you've got a visually impaired client, I now know that situation changes. So, for example, if as a trainer you have a visually impaired client and you want to train something like a sit, people, understandably say, how on earth do you train a sit when
How do you see that the dog is sitting?
yeah, exactly. And that's not unreasonable, and that's why I want to do these videos and things, because I understand why a trainer would go, I don't know how to do this. And that's
Personally, I
okay.
don't know how I would teach a person to teach the dog to sit if he doesn't see if the dog sits, unless I see the dog sitting and I tell him your dog did it, or put a bell on his butt when he sits down and touches the floor. I know the dog sits down, or a plastic paper or something. So
Yeah, so this is kind of why I want to do these talks, because it's absolutely acceptable for trainers to say, this is not my department of expertise. I train dogs. I don't have an ophthalmology degree. I don't understand how much people can and can't see, and I don't understand the sight loss spectrum, and that's okay. So for when you say sit, there are some good suggestions and ideas. What I would do for this one is I have a raised clicker. So this one works because it's tactile. It's easier for a person to see if they've got sight loss.
right,
And also this, where's my camera gone?
right
This fits on a walking stick handle and also on the
on
handle
your
of a
finger.
guide cane. Yeah, so you can also put it on a walking stick or a guide cane,
Perfect.
because the elastic fits over. So you've then got, a person who can have their stick and use their
Right.
stick when they're going along, but they also have a clicker attached, so they can still click. For training a sit, what I would do is I would have, first of all, I would get everybody to sit on a chair, The reason I say this is because if you've got limited or reduced vision and you're stood up, you're much further away from the dog you're trying to train. If you sit down, you've got a better line of vision because you've come back down to their level. So you can see a bit more of their behaviour and what they're doing. I would have the
people who are sight impaired or visual impaired are not always seeing nothing. Some of them see, but not really details. Sometimes they see shade. Sometimes they see better at night than they see at the daytime. Right? There are all these different differentiations.
Definitely. And I should probably point out at this point, because I don't think I've actually even mentioned this. So I had a riding accident in 2012, and then in 2019 I became visually impaired myself.
Oh, on top of the other thing that you have,
Yes.
it's just another one,
just
like
there's
cream
a
on the
couple other
top.
things. Yes. But I think I should probably mention it at this point because I realise now I'm telling people how to train the sight impaired without explaining that I'm sight impaired.
Right.
And this is how I've worked these things out. So I am severely sight impaired. I am registered blind. I have a guide. This is how I've worked out these different methods and how they work and whether they do or they don't work. So actually, while we're on the subject, quickly, you said there are different, sight loss is a spectrum. It's different for everybody. So I've got some examples here to show you what sight loss looks like. So there's, see if I can do this.
Yeah, I can see.
So these are the two images.
Person sees the person in the picture, and the other one with macular degeneration basically sees a black spot. I mean, I have a couple of black spots in my eyesight, so I can sometimes lose sight on some areas. And then if it's different, then you actually see a blurry picture, but not really clear. So if a person sits next to a tree, you don't see the person being in front of the tree. You just see a general light shades.
Yeah, so it's a bit more grayscale. And then there's, hang on, I need to work out which way my camera's going. And then there's this one, so you can have certain patches of your vision are reduced. So you may be looking at an image, but it will be there will be things in front of the image when you're trying to look at it. And then there's this one, which is sort of like tunnel vision. So you can see central vision, but your field of vision is reduced.
Yep.
And then I've kind of found, so to kind of describe what I can see, I see shapes, outlines, and colors, but I don't see detail. So when I look at myself in the mirror, I can't see my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I see a blurry outline. Yes. So I can see a shape, I can see my outline, but I don't see myself. And so my field of vision is reduced. So if I put my fingers, I'll put my fingers to the side of my ears where most people can kind of still see. And I will tell you when I can see my hands, my eyes, my fingers in front of my eyes. So I can see them here. Wow. But if somebody would hold up fingers and tell me how many they were holding up, I wouldn't be able to tell you. So my vision is very much sort of like this.
Right.
So that's my field of vision.
He did have a center vision. He had a peripheral vision, but he could see holding the newspaper, but he couldn't see what's written on it. So if he wanted to see his dog, he would have like looking away from the dog, away from the center where the dog is, so he can see the dog. But if he would be very close, he could recognize.
Yeah. So again, sight loss is a spectrum. So there are people who have a severe sight impairment, and there are people who are registered blind. But the common misconception is that you see nothing at all. It's actually very, very uncommon for somebody to see total darkness and nothing. What you can see is you can have people who just see shadows. They just pick up on different light levels moving. So if you had like a torch, you would see maybe like a red patch that was slightly lighter if it was shining at your face. But again, sight loss is individual for every person. And another common misconception is if you've got a guide dog, you are totally blind and you see nothing. Again, not wholly common. Again, it's called residual or useful vision. So I have, although I'm registered blind, I have residual vision because I can work out shape and outline up close, but I can't
Hmm.
see, again, I can't see my hand, I can't see my feet if I'm stood up. So I have
Right.
I'm short-sighted, but I've got blurs that make up a picture in my head of what I'm trying to see. But I don't see depth. I don't have depth perception. So I can't see curbs or stairs, which is a little bit tricky, if I'm honest. But that's sort of, and I don't see movement very well. So I can't see cars if they're going too fast. I just can't process that image quick enough, which makes crossing the road very sort of difficult and a bit hairy at times, because I don't, unless they have headlights on, I won't always even see that there's a car. But again, I have trained my dogs to adapt to that. But I will get back to that in a little
Yeah, we
bit
can
with
talk to that.
some other
So
questions. Sorry, I
you're
got a bit
open.
sidetracked.
No, 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 no. That's fine. I mean, sidetrack. There is no sidetrack. We are kind of in the moment, like dogs. I'm like squirrel. Let's check it
Yeah.
out.
Oh, that's definitely
Um,
me.
I think um, I usually have trainers once a month coming in and share the experience. I think it's totally worth a series. I don't know what people think about it who are here.
Yeah.
I'm totally into this. You have my Saturdays, so we can go through
Oh.
all this stuff like step by step. I'm on it.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I mean, if people find it interesting enough, I might be
well, the
really
people
boring. I
have
don't
no
know.
clue. You know, they have no clue. They think like disabled people need a dog and that's it. Well, there are
Yeah.
problems here. People cannot afford a dog. People don't have the financial background, and people don't get the support right away. And there are other problems coming in that I have already a dog. I cannot have a second and third dog. Who's going to feed them? I have to get rid of my dog to bring the other dog in. So
Yeah.
there are some morals and ethics in place that are a problem. And then you all of a sudden come up with a plan. Hey, yeah, you can actually work with your own dog if you're lucky. And but let's go back a little bit to the sitting part because I'm really curious how you do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So this is just kind of one example. And again, so this example, I'm going to preface by saying this can work even if you've got somebody who has very, very little remaining vision. So what I would do, what you don't want to do is, as a trainer, take their dog, train them a behaviour, and then give them back and say, your dog did really well. Because the person will
Yep.
say, did they? I've just been sat here. So you don't want to exclude them, which is why for this exercise, hang on a second. In, please. Come on. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting all the dogs back in. They saw something out the window. So for this, to include the client, I would have the trainer hold the clicker. I would give the food to the client who sat down, and I would have the dog facing you. So you almost have a triangle between the trainer, the client, and the dog. And initially what I would do is so the trainer is going to be clicking and marking the behavior of the dog sitting. So initially the trainer will have, they will have a treat and lure the dog into the sit and click. And what I would do is say to the client, when you hear the click, offer the dog some food. So what you're doing is you're actually, you've got them both working to the sound of the clicker. And I would, once you've got the dog is understanding that they're being marked, and you've got, the sit as you're establishing the behavior, they're understanding that they're sitting and marking and being given a reward for that behavior. I would then have the client place their hand on the dog's shoulder blades, just resting there, not pushing them, not forcing them down, just resting your hand on the dog's shoulder blades. And then teach the dog again, doing the sit and the clicking and the marking and the rewarding. But when the dog sits, I would get the client to run their hand down the dog's back, and that becomes part of the behavior sequence. Because what will happen is the dog will understand when you say sit, they will sit, but they will know that you can put your hand on their shoulder blades and then run it down their bottom to make sure that they are sitting before you reward. And that's something a visually impaired person can do once the trainer has established the behavior. Does that
Right,
make
because
sense?
the last thing you want is to give physical affection as a reward before the dog actually sits.
Yeah, so you want the dog to learn that part of this sitting behaviour is the person, they're quite happy with you resting your hand on their back or on their head or wherever and asking them to perform a behaviour, and you then slide your hand down to check. Well, you don't want to do, because I know a lot of dogs who, if you asked them to sit and you went over and tried to stroke them, they'd get up
Get
because
up.
they thought that was the
Yep.
praise, that was, they've ended the behaviour. So you want to almost proof the dog and, include this stroking as part of the checking process before you reward. And that's how I would do the sit.
Right, right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, here is the funny part. I'm coming from industrial engineering, and an injury is blind in the industry. We don't see things happening. We need feedback. So we have sensors all over the machines. If I push that button, is that message going to the machine? If the message goes to the machine, is actually the machine doing what I want it to do? So if I want the piston to go out, is the piston actually activated? And if the piston is activated, does it actually enter the final destination? And when it's there, and if I push that button, that actually the piston come back to the original destination, the original 0 point, for me to do the next step. And all these things have to happen, and all these things have to be confirmed. Not only the departure, but also the arrival. So I have so much information to handle. And so if a dog that is usually giving a visual cue, or does a visual behavior that you can see but you don't see, how do you transfer that information to the patient or to the client? And this is where you come in and says, hey, you know what, I'm going to help the dog associate you with the reward and him doing before he actually gets the reward. So it becomes kind of like a synergistic triangle between the trainer, the dog, and the person. And so then the trainer removes himself, keeping those two just doing what they're doing. So you're kind of like
So,
priming the situation.
yeah. So initially, there are elements of training where you may need an additional, a trainer to help you begin the initial behaviour. So, the marking, the sit. But again, like you say, you want to include the visually impaired person, including being the reward. And so that the dog is always focused. Although you're the clicker, you're the trainer with the clicker in the background. You want the client to be the one that's rewarding the dog. So you can include them. As I said earlier, you don't want to be the trainer that says, we're doing sit, and they take the dog off you, they train it, and they give it back and says, now it can sit. Isn't that great?
I understand what you're going through.
You need the tactile feedback as a visually impaired person, because you just don't have that visual feedback necessarily. And again, that's how I would train the down. So it's all the same process, so the same triangle of learning and having your hand on the shoulder blades, because you will feel the dog as they go down. You don't need to push them down, you can just rest your hand on their back, and as they go down, you'll feel it. But again, that's how you can train a sit and a down and be able to get to a point where the trainer can leave and the dog will know the behaviour and the blind person can then do it independently at home. So yeah.
Makes sense. I had similar problems when I started working online in 2009. Back then we had Skype. And I always struggle, well, how can I help a person who has an aggressive dog to work with his dog if I'm not there controlling the situation? I had to give all that control to the person. I have to give him that knowledge to the person for him to go through this process and do what I would do if I would be there. And I can see where you going through the same process. I cannot take the whole thing away from the person who has to train his dog. You have to come from an angle that my person that I'm working with needs to be in control of the situation all the time. Because I think there's an emotional aspect to it. You have a person who is disabled, they feel disabled, he feels victimized at that point. And then you're coming in, showing him how good you are, or he sees how good you are, or he can hear how good you are. And then you still have to give him that power. He has to keep that power. And you have to let go of that power. That's a big thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what this is why I think these talks and things are important, because it's absolutely okay as a trainer to say, I don't understand disabilities, I don't understand all of them, I don't understand how you work with them. But you can say, you can become a partnership and say to the client, right, I'll bring the dog training knowledge, you bring the knowledge of your disabilities and we will work together and communicate and work out, what you can and you can't see, or what you could and you couldn't do from a wheelchair, for example. And using my dog training knowledge, I'll adapt the behaviours we were going to train to make it accessible. And that's kind of why I think these talks are important, because there just aren't that many resources online that would say, this is how you would train a person, this is how you would train a visually impaired person's dog. So that's, but yeah, you have to give that disabled person the independence as well, because as you say, you can't just do it for them. No. Because when you go home, the dog might know the behaviour, but that person still needs to rely on you to show them the behaviour and how to do it.
Why would he do this with this person if he can do it with you?
It's, when you go home, is the person still going to be able to do this behaviour independently? And you have to be able to empower them and adapt training sessions and things so that they can do that.
Right. I worked with a client in the past who had difficulties bending down and doing anything physical. She basically was in a wheelchair and she just barely could move her hands. And somebody was smart enough to give her a puppy, a German Shepherd puppy. She was like 4 months old, and this dog was all over the place. I was so frustrated. I was actually angry going to that person's house, because I see, why would people do that to that person? Having a 5 months old puppy, biting her, and she was in pain. Like, this dog was really being hard on this person. And then I had to go through this process. I said, I need to sit on your wheelchair. I need to sit there to see what options do I have, having only one hand and that puppy jumping on me, because I couldn't get rid of that puppy at that point. I would definitely say, the rescue has to take the puppy back, because that was definitely not the appropriate solution. But on the other hand, I said, maybe we have a chance. So I tried. And we got to the point that the puppy learned to come up and sit. And all she had to do is let go of the treat when the puppy arrived. But she was able to see. That was a good part. Now, for trainers who go into these situations and taking on a client, even trying to take on a client, because you don't know until you kind of deal with it, what are the do's and don'ts?
So I think the worst thing you can do is be closed-minded and, think, well, I just don't know how I'm going to train this with this person. That's the worst attitude you can have, because you've already shut down those barriers and, you've put up walls and you've closed the doors, and that's it. And the last thing you want to do is say to somebody, well, I just don't think you're going to be able to do this. And unfortunately, I know people that has happened to. They've gone to a training class and they've taken their puppy, and the trainer, they're doing a group activity, and one by one, everybody does it. And they get to the disabled person and the trainer has gone, I think you'll have to skip this one. Do you want to sit this one out? Instead of going, here's an idea I've got to adapt this exercise for you.
Yeah.
So don't close the door and make me, that makes things impossible. What you can say is, we're going to train this behavior like a sit, but what I need from you is I need you to help me understand what you are able to do and what you are not able to do. So you understand the person's limitations, but what they're also capable of. And it's never, I would say, do communicate. You can never over communicate with somebody, and you can never say, you say to somebody, how can I help you? How can we make this easier for you? What do you need from me? You've got the dog training knowledge as the trainer, but you can't put it into practice unless you know what this person is actually capable of. But also, it's important to remember that disabled people have adapted to survive in every aspect of their life. For multiple, a whole host of disabilities doesn't just apply to one, like sight loss, it's everything. The world isn't always, it's not an accessible place. So actually, disabled people are incredibly good at adapting everything around them to survive and make it fit for them. So, you can always say to a person, this is what we're going to do. I had some suggestions, but I'd like your feedback, because actually the disabled person is the first one who will be able to say, I can't do that standing up, but I could do it sitting down. And suddenly
Right.
this behaviour is achievable. So always communicate and, ask them how they feel about something. Don't just assume. And I would also say, because you've worked with, maybe you've worked with one person with sight loss, don't then assume that every other client with sight loss will be the same, because everybody's different. And what one person can do, another person might not be able to do. So never presume that every condition is the same, or even that even that two people with the same condition will be the same. Again, communicate and ask them what would be useful for them. I would say also language is really important. So I would, as a trainer, if that email drops into your inbox and that person says, I would like to bring my puppy to your group puppy sessions, just to make you aware I'm visually impaired. If they've used the term visually impaired, use that word and mirror their language, because some people, if you then said to that person, I've never worked with a blind person, they may not, they choose the language they would like to see repeated to them. Mm-hmm. Some people don't like the word blind. Some people don't associate it with themselves. There's visually impaired, there's blind, there's severely sight impaired, partially sighted. Some people use all the different words to describe their own personal sight loss. So I would say mirror the language they're using, and maybe just be aware, or ask them and say, sorry, do you mind me using this term? A really good example is, I don't mind what people call my sight loss. For me, the words are interchangeable. You want to call me blind? Okay. You want to say, you've got sight loss? That's fine. The only word for me that would ever personally cause offence, and I don't, I'm not easily offended. I'm very easygoing. But the only word for me that would cause offence would be the word handicapped. And in the UK, we don't use that term. It's considered derogatory over here because it has real negative connotations, because it's got a very poor history over here. And the words and the things that are associated with that word over here are the reasons that we don't use it in the UK. But I understand if I went to somewhere like the US, the term is used more frequently. It's just sort of, it's part of the language, maybe. But I mean, if somebody in the UK said you're handicapped, I would politely correct them and say, actually, I prefer the term disabled, because to me, handicapped is a word I would not use to describe myself. You say, some people, words are important to some people. For me, over here, handicapped in my mind is used when you say it's holding somebody back. It's a negative word for us, and we use it to describe something that's maybe wrong or lesser than. So if somebody said, you're handicapped, I would say, no, I'm not. I'm disabled. I do have disabilities, but I don't let them hold me back, which is why I prefer the term disabled. But again, I guess if you're in different countries, you use different words. But for me personally, language is important. And if I was talking to, if I was a client and a trainer used that word, that would be something I would, politely correct them on. So again, if you don't see these words used in their emails or their correspondence, then maybe don't use them. Sorry, does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow, I learned so much. I mean, I always learn all the time, but it's kind of a lot to digest because of all these aspects of it. Usually you go to training, you kind of deal with the dog, and now you have to deal with the person and the dog and yourself, because you cannot use the common language, you cannot use the common skills, you cannot use the common tools, you cannot use the common, process. You have to really adapt. The good thing is, if you have that already in your process, and adaptability. Hold on a second. I'll be right back.
Good dogs. Good boy.
Sorry for that kind of little emergencies.
That's right, not to
So
worry.
now we got the language down. How? What are the categories that you see that people need help with their dogs? What are the training skills a person with disabilities should know? The basics.
So things like heel work heel work is a huge behavior and a training aspect in itself for anyone. But I think especially if you've got, a disability that affects your balance or your, spatial awareness or anything like that, heel work is really daunting. So for me as well, because I was visually impaired, the way that I changed my way that I taught heel work, because heel work is difficult at the best of times, but I was also visually impaired. I can't see my feet, I can't see the ground in front of me, I've got to use a cane when I'm also trying to teach heel work, and I have a spaniel. And they are notoriously known for their kind of quick movements, their quick behavior, and their rush to get everywhere. They're very fast thinking, fast moving dogs. So I would say as a disabled person, my tip would be to find a trainer who understands there are different methods of teaching heel work, and find one who isn't going to say, no, I've always trained it this way, this is how we'll do it. Find a trainer who will say, okay, that method didn't work, let's try something else, or let's take it right back to basics, or doing 300 peck method where you reward every step and then build up the number of steps. If that doesn't work, you move on to circles and things like that, and you just find a trainer who will adapt the training to work with you, not just go, no, I've always taught it this particular way. And I think that's the same for all training, really. Just find a trainer who is also flexible and adaptable and open-minded. And don't be afraid to with the information you're given from a trainer, don't be afraid to play around with things. So an example I gave briefly in the beginning, and I said I'd come back to, is things like target training. Mm-hmm. So in some respects, this is really good because you've got this really big, obvious red ball on the end. It's easy to see. This is easy to hold. And for some people, this might work really well. However, as soon as you start moving this is a telescopic one. So as soon as you start doing the target training from a distance and you've got it sort of facing further and further away from you, if you can't see, you're going to miss this dog's attempts to touch the ball from further away.
Right.
And because this is plastic, you lose feedback. So if it's here, you'll feel the dog's even the tiniest touches. But once you start extending it, you can't see it and you lose the tactile feedback. So don't be afraid to play around with things. And this is where this comes in, my wooden spoon. Mm-hmm. So this is really useful as a visually impaired person, but I've also seen people who are wheelchair users find this really useful. Yes, it's a wooden spoon. Yes, I've had to adapt a training aid, The reason I've put this on here is because it's very easy for me to see. And the reason I've put this on, so this is just some bandage, is it makes it easier to grip. So if you struggle to grip, this is a really easy thing for you to hold rather than
because people have inflammation in their
plastic.
hands. They'll sometimes have hard time touching it and holding it and
Yeah.
keeping it in
So
place.
if you've got reduced mobility in your hands, this is much easier to hold than a slippery plastic target stick.
Right.
What you will also find is even if you've got a reduced grip and you can't hold this, you can have it resting on your hand, or if you're working from a chair, you can still use this for the dog. And because it's a more solid object, even the slightest touch you feel vibrating down the spoon into your hand. So even if you can't see the dog, coming up to attempt to touch it for a nose target, you can still feel it. You'll feel even tiny movements and you can reward them. So the dog, you don't want to miss the behaviour or any attempts to do the behaviour because you can't feel this sort of
Makes
thing.
sense.
So, and the other aspect of this one, don't be afraid to play around with training aids, because if you're in a wheelchair and you've got the dog, you want to train heel work next to a wheelchair, you don't want the dog coming too close to your wheels. They could go under your wheels,
right, and
get their
stepping on
paws
him.
stuck. So if you've got a wooden spoon, sorry, I'm trying to do it further away. If you've got a wooden spoon, you've suddenly got all this amount of extra length between you and the dog. But if you're holding it this end and you're doing target training, it means that your wheel of your chair will be here somewhere by your hand. And
Right.
suddenly the dog is trying to target over here. So although they're still close to you, they'll be about here. They'll be missing under your wheel. And they won't go under your wheel. You have this much extra space to play with.
Right.
So it means that when you're doing your target training and the dog is, if you're doing the heel work training with your peanut butter on your spoon, encouraging the dog into proximity, but you're doing it from a wheelchair, it means that you've got this much extra space, which provides safety to your dog. It's easy for you to hold. You can use your wheel on the other side still. It's easy to hold. You're not going to drop it because it's got grip on it, but it means you're not losing any feedback if the dog is trying to touch it. So I would say, as a disabled person, don't be afraid to play around and create your own training aids. It's not silly if it works. Yes, you might be the person training your dog with a wooden spoon, but if it works, it works.
Wow, Lisa, all those details, people don't think of that. Like, yeah, well, I just need a target training and just need to do that, but you don't think about all these little aspects around that. Makes totally sense. Now, what would be your general message to people who says, okay, now I get the message. I will work around that. Now I'm gonna go to a shelter and get a dog, or should I go to a breeder and get a dog? Because I cannot afford like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 dog or somebody to kind of train it. I can only afford it myself. Can somebody train his own dog, even if with disabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the UK, you can have, and I believe this is the same for service dogs in America, you have charities that provide fully trained dogs. But over here, we can also own a train. So it's 100% legal to own a train your own dog. It is possible. What I would say is if you're going to go down the owner trainer route, and you can have a dog from a breeder, or you can rescue a dog, provided that rescue allows you to rescue dogs with this purpose in mind. Some of the UK charities have put restrictions on, and they specifically say on the website, we do not home dogs to people who intend to train them as assistance dogs. So you have to find, if you're going to try and go through the rescue route, you have to find a charity that are willing to home a dog for this purpose. But yes, in the UK, you can actually own a train your dog. But what I would say is if you're going to do this, do get a dog trainer on board, because the dog trainer, again, the dog trainer brings the skills and the knowledge of animal behaviour and how to train tasks. But the disabled handler can give you an insight into their world and their capabilities. So you can work together, and you can own a trainer dog. So actually, okay, she's down, she's under my feet. So my spaniel is with a charity. So she wasn't provided to me as a fully trained dog. I bought her as a puppy from a breeder with the intention of having her as my assistance dog. However, we haven't solely owner trained, so it's not just me doing all of the work. So we're registered with a charity called Canine Generated Independence, and they work slightly differently to other charities in that I have my dog, I bought my dog, and then when she's over 12 months, they will assess your pet dog. And if your pet dog passes all the same criteria and suitability and temperament tests as, say, Guide Dogs UK and all of the program trained dogs, if your pet dog meets all the criteria and passes those tests, they will help you train your pet dog. So we do. So although she lives with me, she's grown up with me from 9 weeks, and she was, purchased as a pet. I purchased her with the intention of her being an assistance dog. So she came from a breeder, although you can rescue, and the charity we're with every week, I work with a behaviourist and a trainer, and they constantly assess both myself and my dog to make sure we're still on track and we still meet this criteria. And then you have to pass your exams in order to wear the jackets, and you get a certificate to say you've passed the specific levels, and then you have the final public access test. And at this point, your assistance dog, if they pass this test, they are now an assistance dog. As I say, this is charity training still, but it's with a pet dog. So you don't have to pay thousands to send your dog to a trainer to have it trained. You don't have to pay thousands to, purchase a fully trained assistance dog. You either rescue or buy your dog. It's a pet. It's under your ownership. And should she, for whatever reason, fail as an assistance dog, she would stay with me as a pet. Although she's actually fantastic, and she's doing really, really well with her training. But yes, in the UK, should you want to, you can, as a disabled person, procure a dog through rescue or a breeder from breeder, and you can train a dog yourself to train them to the standards and the tasks that you need specifically for you.
Right. What is the message you would send, or what is the message you want to send to fellow trainers who says, you know what, I think I can do this. I think I can kind of like start working with people with disabilities. What is the message you want to send them? No, not a good idea. Or, go for it. No problem.
I would say absolutely go for it. Just remember to keep the communication open, mirror the language that person uses so that you don't use the wrong terms and potentially offend them. Just be aware of your language, and communicate and say to them, I will openly admit that I have not worked with a person with this condition or disability before, but I'm willing to learn, because that's the important bit. As long as you're open-minded, and you bring the behaviour to the class and the person brings their knowledge of their personal situation, I'm sure you can come to some sort of arrangement and you can work well together. It's just about being open-minded and giving it a try. But also what I would say is, look, before the client even reaches your training venue, you need to look at how they find you and how they get you. How did they get you via a website, or did they get you via Facebook? You need to look at your website and say, is my website actually accessible? Does it have clear text? Is it is it clear text on a nice clear font on a contrasting background, so a white or black font, or a blue background which is easy to see? Or have I gone a bit over the top and have I got writing all over pictures? Is the writing in italics? Can you actually read it? So look at your website before anything else. It's brilliant wanting to work with disabled clients, but you need to make sure they can actually get to you and you're accessible through your website and your Facebook, because I use a screen reader. So I have accessible technology to get onto people's websites. But my screen reader I press a button, it reads every piece of text on every page, and it continues to read until I tell it to stop. If I, as a blind person, have to go through 7 pages of text to find out where your location is and where your training venue is based, I'm likely going to give up, because I will, after all of these pages and pages of text, if I can't find your location, I'm going to think this isn't accessible. So look at your
If I can't get
website.
to the website, how can I get to you?
Exactly. And what I would also suggest is, it's fantastic wanting to work with a disabled person, but is your venue actually disability friendly? Have you said on your website if your venue is a village hall with a ramp in the front, or is it a village hall with a step at the front but a ramp at the fire exit? Can a person with a wheelchair actually get into your venue? Because there is no point saying to somebody, absolutely come to my classes, we'd love to have you, if they're going to arrive in their wheelchair and realize they can't get in. You need to make sure your venue is actually accessible too. So look at your website and look at your venue first, and make sure you're, adapted and you're able to have disabled clients in your workspace.
I hear you. I saw it yesterday actually. I went to a restaurant and they had these super awesome elevators that actually didn't work. So if I would be a person with a wheelchair, I would like to have a coffee, but I couldn't get to the coffee because the elevator didn't work, and not suddenly, because literally that elevator didn't work for a couple of years based on what I saw. But
Yeah.
Good.
And
So
that's
we talked a lot.
Yeah, we have. That is incredibly your experience with the elevators is incredibly common. There's so many places and venues that will say disabled friendly, and when you get there, they say, "Oh no, the lift's actually been broken for a couple of months." This happened at my doctor's surgery, of all places. So it's, before you start, just check everything's in order before you start welcoming disabled clients, and check they can actually get to you. You've said where you are, and your website is easily accessible. But no, I think we've covered it a lot. My mobility.
How is your mobility? Are you using a wheelchair? Are you using crutches? How do you move?
So I have a white guide cane, which I use out in public. But I am a part-time wheelchair user. So when I'm talking about disability awareness, I'm fortunate in that I have an experience of, maneuvering through my world in a wheelchair as well. Now I'm part-time, so, I can't claim to, understand fully what it's like to be in a wheelchair permanently, but I do use one out and about, because I have chronic pain and chronic fatigue as a result of my head injury, but I also have a condition where my joints dislocate. So I do use a wheelchair in public as well. But so yes, my mobility does involve a wheelchair or my guide cane, but obviously my vision affects my balance and things as well. So my mobility and spatial awareness aren't always brilliant, which again gives me an insight into how to do heel work and things when you're off balance.
Right. I would like to meet next time and work something specifics.
Yeah.
What would you like to work next time?
Oh, I don't know.
Over teaching dogs to sit?
Yeah, I mean, let's think of something. I'm happy to do another session. We've talked a lot.
Course. Yeah. You know what? These are things. I will cancel my appointments, kind of thing. make
oh,
room
don't
for
do that.
No, because I mean, always with consent of people, right? I'm just canceled blind. But I had done this in the past. I say, hey, we have this super thing going on today, which I did, and I said, hey, can we move our appointment a little bit later? And she's like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this. Like, okay. One thing that always sits heavy in my heart when I see people with visual disabilities, people behave weird around them.
Oh yeah. In fact, I could do a whole session about all the weird things people say.
They kind of like make themselves invisible they kind of be quiet. They don't know what to say about it, or kind of say, "Hey, you, can I touch you on the back?" And the person's like, "What the heck? What's going on here?" Right? What
Yeah.
what what could the person do? Let's say I'm walking down the street with my dog. I'm walking my dog down the street, and I see a person um, with his canine working his way through the path. What do I do? Do I be quiet? Do I get off my path? Do I tell him, "Hey, his dog is coming over. He's friendly. He's gonna jump on you, but he loves you," kind of thing. What should I do?
So I think it's always useful if you're going along. So again, I get it. I'm always startled by people because although I can see shape and color, very often when I'm walking and I'm looking down at my assistance dog or down at my feet to see where I'm going. And then I look up and suddenly there's a person here. And they could have said hi, but they didn't. They just stood there like a lemon, and I've walked into them, and somehow it's my fault.
Yeah, well, you should know that somebody's there in front of you. Wait, what do you
Yeah,
stick for?
if they've watched me coming for this long and they've known that I'm going to get that close to them, what possesses them to stand there and remain standing there? I don't know. Maybe they like being run into. I'm not sure. So I would say if you can see somebody is approaching and you've got your dog, I mean, I'm always talking to my dog, and saying to her, "Come on then, good girl, yeah, let's go," and I have full-on conversations with her. So I would say, if you can see somebody coming, maybe talk to your dog so that they're aware of you upcoming. But you can also, if there's a bit you can pull into, like a doorway, maybe pull into there and say, there's a dog on your left coming up, or, I'm just getting my dog out the way for you. If you, just actually verbalize and communicate what's going on, I'm sure it will be appreciated. But you can always, even if you just say, there's a dog to your left, just something like that. Or if you can see something like a lamp post is coming up and you're worried that that person's going to walk into it, if you say to them, in 20 paces there's a lamp post, then that's fine. That's information. That's useful information. But give them some like an actual distance of measurement, so like 20 paces, because the worst thing that happens for me, and it happens all the time, is I'll say to somebody, like in a shop, I'll say, "Where do you find the tinned pineapple?" And they'll go, "Over there." And I think, well, that's not. And where exactly is over there? Please specify. So if you're going to, if you can see somebody coming and you want to help them out or give them some verbal information and some visual feedback, make sure it's in a measurement they can understand, like 20 paces, or, it's on your right as you're coming up now, or something like that, just so that they're aware that you're there. And if there is a hazard, if you can tell them, I'm sure it will help them massively. But yeah, so that's my advice, is just, make yourself known, even if it's just talking to your dog slightly, louder, and say, "No, come on, let's go, you stand here for a minute," or they'll be able to hear which way you've come from. But yeah, just make yourself known. Don't just be that person that stands there until you run into them. Because that's just never helpful. But no, I think it's been a really useful chat.
Right?
And I hope it's been useful for your viewers.
Great feedback. Well, it was very helpful for me. I don't know how people watch it. How is it? Hey guys, I know you're very focused on what she's saying. Me too, right? But what is your feedback? How did you like it? Did you learn anything from it? So, but I will kind of plan ahead, and we're going to talk about once we're done here, to set something up, because I think it's something nobody likes to touch or likes to talk about it. I like to talk about things nobody wants to talk about.
Me too.
And
I'm happy to talk about disabilities and awareness and things, but actually you find people think it's taboo, so they just don't ask you.
yeah, I mean,
You
okay,
know,
I
if they
can
ask
screw
me, I
things
tell
up and I
them.
make mistakes talking. Like, oops, yeah, well, you know what? Better me than somebody else and put somebody else in danger.
Yeah.
And I have the excuse it's not my first language, English. So I can say, I didn't know. It's my third language, fourth language. I'm fine with it. Good.
Wow.
So I really appreciate um, you sharing all these things. And I think I kind of put a little bit the personal button here. And sometimes my edit button doesn't really work as well. But I thank you for sharing all these things and for sharing your journey and all these things that you have been through, getting to that point of helping people who have disabilities like you have, and that's a big thing. I mean, you're kind of my hero,
Oh, not that exciting.
right? Heroes are people who do things that people not do usually, and I think there are people out there like you who actually pave their own path. You walk down the road that nobody else have done. Well, there are somewhere roads somewhere else, but not the road that you can kind of access because you had to create your things, your tools, your dog, your environment. You have to kind of get out of your own, let's call it trauma brain, and think outside of that box because you can be the victim and says, in that state I just deserve help. And you says, no, I need to help myself. I need to go beyond that line. Am I wrong?
Yeah, no, I think you've got it spot on. It would be very easy to decide to be sad about things for the rest of your life, but I've made a conscious choice to be happy and positive because, you know, otherwise I don't want to be sad for the rest of my life. I could be, but I don't want to be. So I make a positive, you know, I make a conscious choice to be positive. Um, and I'm more than happy to, you know, laugh about things and laugh about when I get things wrong and, you know, I fall over, you know, and I'm happy to laugh about it because it's
Haha, I
better to
didn't
laugh
see it
about
coming.
these things. um, so, you know, and I live by the phrase find a way, not an excuse, because I could shut down my opportunities and say, no, I can't do that because, you know, I'm disabled, or I can't do that because I can't see. But you know, I don't want to shut myself down into a sad little box. And
Isn't that
you
the
know, I
same way you
think
work with dogs too? It's kind of like it's your philosophy. I don't just give up. I just try to find a way around it. Obstacles are here to be,
exactly.
right? It's that
Yeah,
what
I
makes
mean,
you special.
oh well, no, I'm just very fortunate to have very clever dogs that make it look like I know what I'm doing.
Ah, come on, give yourself some
um,
credit.
okay, I'll give myself credit for making a spoon. I did that, but no, the rest of it is I have incredible dogs who are very patient, you know, and they put up with my clumsiness as we work our way through things. But you know, I mean, if it wasn't for my little terrier, I wouldn't be anywhere that I am now. So you know, it was all. Although this is to help clients and their dogs, and I want to pass on all the things I've learned, this all started for me because of one little scruffy Jack Russell. um, and it's
It's
amazing
only
how
one.
things
It's
can.
always that one
Yeah,
dog
there's
that
always a
makes you
one
go
that
a
one
step
dog that
further.
starts it. Yeah.
I had my first experience with aggression, basically, and with difficult behaviors, and I was way out my league. Was a three-legged dog who was so difficult that basically he was in a separate section on a shelter with a food drawer because nobody could open the gate. And when I came in there, people asked him like, "Are you sure about that?" Because I wouldn't do it, and I was like, "Yeah, what's wrong with this guy? You don't want to know." And I was like, "Great. Well, you know what? It took me a couple of months to kind of figure out a way for him not to bite me because it was kind of an everyday thing that's going to happen." And we kind of made a good team, and I learned a lot from him. So he brought me to that level that I'm right now. Basically, he created that foundation of holistic dog training, and I was not on a good path when I met him. We were both on the opposite sides. Like he was fighting to survive, and I was fighting to control. It was not a good place to be, and I'm not proud of that time, but I appreciate that time because I learned a lot, and I learned how. how I would not do it again, and what people struggling who still chooses those routes, like you had, for example. You didn't know about positive training until you got into that situation. Says, I don't want to share pain with my dog. I want to do it pain-free and force-free. And if my dog does a service for me, I want him to have this free will of making that service from me and not forcing him. I just Googled, just right now, I was trying to pull up a picture for a person walking with his service dog next to him on a wheelchair, and he had a shock collar hanging over his shoulder. And like,
Yeah.
why? Why would
I
we
think,
have to choose these routes?
yeah, and I think that's another, that's another huge topic of discussion is why do trainers think that disabled people can't train without, unless they use force? And why is it acceptable for us, to put these things on our dog and, shock them or use prongs to make up for our own limitations? Surely you should just train around it. There's always a way to do it force free if you want to do it that way.
Yeah. And
It
there's
would be
also a
easy.
taboo.
Yeah, exactly. It would be easy for me to say, well, I'm sight impaired. So if my dog pulls me over, I can't have that. So I'll put her on a prong collar. But actually, that's not learning. That's just, it's pain and it's a plaster method. And actually, because I've done it force free, we have a much better bond. She has a much better understanding of it because I haven't just punished her.
Right.
She's learned what I would like from her. And actually, it's a more consistent behavior all round because now, even if I walk too far or I drop her lead or whatever, she will just come straight back to me. And if I'd, hurt her to get to this point of heel work, I don't think she would have done that for me.
Yeah.
But anyway, end of rant.
No, these are things that have to be said. I mean, now with all the social media, we see, I see a lot of people who are disabled, and I appreciate them sharing their life and their path, working with their dogs. And then you see what they're doing, and have this justification around that. Well, you don't know what I'm struggling with. I know what your dog is struggling with right now. If you're going through that force, causing trauma to your dog, while you know exactly how trauma feels and how PTSD feels and how pain feels, just because it's not visible doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And we have to put some morals and ethics. I always see, and I'm coming always from a perspective that I don't have this disability other people have, but I would never put my dog into that state of mind that I'm forcing him to do something because I deserve it. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and I've always, my dog works for me force free because we're a partnership. It's not a dictatorship. I'm not forcing her to, serve me. That's not how we do this. She has to work for me because she wants to and she likes her job. And again, I know, there's this idea that if you're disabled, you can't train for free. And I'm very fortunate to know an incredible lady. She's called Tasha Atwood. And she is a wheelchair user. She is disabled and she has wolf dogs, and she trains force free. And, whenever I see a comment online about, disabled people can't own dogs, they can't walk them or whatever, I always think of this incredible lady that I know
Ben
who is
Hur
disabled.
with the two horses in front of me. Yeah, let's go,
Yeah.
guys.
And, you think she's just, she's such an incredible example of, yes, she's disabled. Yes, she's a wheelchair user. Yes, she's an amazing dog trainer. And yes, she has wolf dogs. And yes, she's doing it force free.
Yes, she
And
has
if you
big
can do
dogs and
all
she
of
can
those
do
things
this.
force free, so can other people. So it's always possible force free.
Yeah, it is. It is because so many years we did it. All of a sudden, suddenly, after the late 1900s, we couldn't do it, and we have to use those bad tools. Well, we did it like for 4.2 million generations. We were totally able to do that, but now we are disabled. We cannot do that. It's kind of wrong. Okay, end of
Yeah.
little rant.
Yeah. I
So,
was going to say, we almost
um,
went on a whole different hour-long rant there. There's
right.
so many things you can cover though.
So let's renew our date or
Yeah.
a video date to a
I'll
very
bring
near
more tea.
future, right? And we can go on and on with this kind of stuff. But let's create a little bit of structure. I mean, I have a lot of people in my Facebook group and you are in a Facebook group, we're going to share the link in the comments, where you guys support each other in dog training.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people who in my group are people with disabilities, and they're there because they don't want to use force methods. They try to use methods without pain, but my knowledge is limited. I don't have that broad knowledge to give to them, even if I had a couple of clients that I worked with in the past successfully, but it's not really I can say, hey, this is the library. I don't have that library. And I don't think there is a book out there other than Train Your Own Service Dog, but
Yeah.
really, it's not really that level.
Yeah. So there is a group I would definitely recommend. And as I said to you, I don't unfortunately have the capability with my health conditions to have a dog training business myself anymore. I'm just not well enough to take on clients. However, if there are people who are looking for help with their training, whether it's a service dog, assistance dog, pet dog, and they have disabilities and they're looking for, a safe space and a community group where people, get it and understand it, then you've linked the group below, but it's called Miyagi's Training Community. And this was actually set up by, Tasha Atwood, who I just mentioned with her wolf dogs and her kick-ass behaviour knowledge, and she set it up. And so she's in there, I'm in there. There are incredible force-free trainers, and we have a whole range of health conditions and disabilities between us. We've all got an experience of something. We've all got different conditions or disabilities, but it's become a real safe space where, as long as you are force-free or you're balanced, but you're hoping to transition to force-free training and you would like a safe space to learn, then that's the group for you, because none of us will judge. We can recommend and we have suggestions. And again, I'm there with my spoon, ready to make training aid adaptations and things. So, we're just a friendly group and we'll accept anyone. As long as you're force-free and you love your dog and you want to learn, you're in.
Yeah, that's the group, right?
Yes. So I will post a link as well into your Facebook group.
Good. Okay, I think we totally got this today.
Yep.
And I'm glad you could make it so far, because it's sometimes challenging, even if it's just a little bit of a pain. And see you guys soon again. We're going to talk about stuff. I'm going to set something up.
Yeah, that'd be great. And thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.